The German shepherd barked at the sealed door. What they found behind it froze everyone cold. This is more than a rescue. It's a reminder that love and loyalty still exist in this world. A faithful dog, a fragile moment, and a miracle no one expected. But let me ask you, have you ever seen loyalty that words could not explain? Like, share, and subscribe so more people can feel this story too. It was a night when the cold felt sharper than glass. The little town lay still, wrapped in heavy silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Snow covered the streets in a white blanket, and the wind that moved through the bare trees carried a soundless weight, the kind of chill that made even the strongest men quicken their steps home. No one was outside, no lamps lit in the windows, and the small houses along the road looked like they were fast asleep under the frozen sky. But near the edge of the town, where an old road led toward a forgotten street, the silence broke. A sudden bark, deep and sharp, cut through the night air. It was not the playful bark of a happy dog, but the urgent sound of a German shepherd sensing something that no one else could. His body stood firm, his breath fogging in the icy air, eyes locked on a single spot. In front of him stood an abandoned house that had been left untouched for many years, its windows broken, its roof sagging under the weight of time. The shepherd barked again, louder this time, echoing through the street. His paws pressed against the frozen ground as he pulled forward, circling, growling low, his nose pushing toward the heavy wooden door that had long been sealed shut. The door looked unnatural, as though someone had hammered it closed with planks and nails, determined that no one should ever open it again. Yet the dog's restless body told another story. Something was hidden behind it. Within minutes, the sound of barking carried across the sleeping town. Curtains moved, doors opened, and one by one, people began to step outside into the freezing night. A farmer, still in his heavy coat. A teacher, clutching her scarf. A mother holding her child close against the cold. Even the old policeman, who rarely left his porch after dark, arrived with a lantern in hand. They followed the noise until they reached the forgotten house. And there they saw it, the shepherd, pacing, barking, scratching at the sealed door with a desperation that shook everyone who watched. His eyes were wild with something deeper than fear. He was not asking. He was begging. The baby girl who often walked with him in her tiny blue dress stood close by, her small hand clutched tightly around the edge of her blanket. She did not cry, but her wide eyes never left the door. Somehow, she too felt the weight of what was hidden behind it. She tugged at her grandmother's sleeve, whispering in a voice only the old woman could hear, "He wants us to see." The crowd grew uneasy. Some whispered that the house was cursed. Others feared wild animals inside. But no one could deny the intensity in the dog's cry. It was not madness. It was not noise. It was warning. The air seemed to thicken around the group, every breath visible in the cold night, every heart beating faster than it should. The wind stilled, the snow hung silent, and for a moment, all that existed was the sound of the shepherd's bark striking against the sealed door. And in that stillness, something passed through the people. A shiver not from the winter cold, but from the unknown truth waiting just beyond those planks. What they would find behind that door would not only silence their fear, but carve itself into their memory forever. It would be the kind of discovery that left even the strongest souls frozen in place, their hearts unable to beat the same way again. At the far end of town, where the paved road turned into gravel and the streetlights no longer reached, stood a house that time itself seemed to have abandoned. Its wooden walls were gray and splintered, its roof sagged like an old man's shoulders, and the windows gaped open like blind eyes, covered only with broken glass and dust. The porch, once proud and wide, now leaned unevenly, each step creaking under the weight of silence. Ivy crept up the sides, twisting through cracks, as if nature itself was trying to pull the house back into the earth. The townsfolk called it the Forgotten House. For decades it had stood there, weathering storms, winters, and years of neglect. No one remembered the last family who lived in it. Children, curious and wild, sometimes dared each other to run up to the door, knock once, and run back before the house woke up. Their laughter carried down the road, but even they never stayed long. Parents warned their little ones to keep away, whispering of strange noises, of creaks and sighs that came even when no wind blew. Elders told stories too, though never in full, their voices dropping to a hush whenever the subject came up. "Don't go near it," they would say. "Some doors are closed for a reason." But children are children, and stories only make curiosity grow. Many times, boys and girls tried to peer through the cracks, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever secrets the house held. Each time, they left unsettled, swearing they heard something move inside. A shuffle, a whisper, the faint sound of something scratching. And so the house gained its own life in the town's imagination, a place of warnings, dares, and uneasy glances. On one cold afternoon, when the winter sun hung low and pale, a little girl in a blue dress walked down that forgotten road. She was only 3 years old, her small boots crunching over the frost-covered ground, her cheeks red from the biting air. In one hand she carried a rag doll, its yarn hair faded from love and play. At her side walked her guardian, a large German shepherd with black and tan fur, his body strong yet graceful, his amber eyes sharp against the dull sky. The dog's steps were slow at first, matching the little girl's tiny stride. His tail swayed gently, his ears relaxed. But as they drew closer to the end of the road, his body stiffened. His nose twitched in the cold air, catching a scent that seemed to come from the direction of the old house. His ears shot upright, every muscle pulling taut. The little girl tugged softly at his collar, but he no longer followed her pace. Instead, he pulled forward, his nails scraping against the frozen ground. His growl was low at first, a sound like thunder far in the distance. Then, with sudden force, he barked, sharp and loud, his voice rolling across the empty street like an alarm. The girl stopped, her doll slipping from her fingers into the snow. She looked up at the old house, its shadow stretching across the frosty yard. Her wide eyes filled with a mix of fear and wonder. She had passed this road many times before, but never had her dog behaved like this. His body pressed forward, his breath quickening, as if an invisible hand was pulling him straight toward the heavy sealed door. The door itself looked strange compared to the rest of the house. While the windows sagged and the walls rotted, the door stood firm, almost unnaturally so. Thick wooden planks had been nailed across it, layer upon layer, until it seemed more like a wall than an entrance. Rusted iron nails jutted out, their tips sharp, their surfaces darkened by years of weather. It was the kind of door someone wanted to keep closed forever. But the German shepherd would not be stopped. His bark grew louder, echoing through the trees. He pawed at the frozen ground, lunging toward the steps that led up to the porch. His teeth flashed, his tail stiff, every part of his body alive with urgency. The little girl, too small to hold him back, stumbled a few steps behind, clutching at his collar with both hands. "Stop, boy, stop," she whispered, her voice trembling. But he did not stop. The sound carried down the road, reaching the ears of those who lived nearby. Curtains shifted. Doors creaked open. Neighbors began to appear, drawn by the sharp barks that broke the silence of their quiet evening. A farmer wiping his hands on his coat. A teacher with her books still under her arm. An old woman leaning heavily on her cane. They all knew the sound of that dog, steady, loyal, never barking without reason. And now, seeing him there at the door of the forgotten house, their hearts tightened. "Why there?" one whispered. "What's he found?" asked another. The little girl clung tightly to her shepherd as more people gathered. Her blue dress fluttered in the cold wind, her small lips quivering. She did not understand, not fully, but she trusted her dog. She knew he was trying to tell them something important. The shepherd scratched at the steps, his deep growls shaking the silence like a drumbeat. His eyes locked on the sealed door, unblinking, determined. No one dared to move closer. The weight of the stories, the unease of the house, and the strange power in the dog's cry held them all frozen in place. It was then that the old woman with the cane spoke, her voice quivering yet certain. "He knows. That dog knows. Something is behind that door." The crowd shivered as the winter wind swept through, but it was not the cold that made their skin prickle. It was the truth they felt but could not yet see. Something lay hidden in the forgotten house, and for the first time in years, its secrets were about to rise again. The German shepherd would not rest. His body moved in sharp, restless circles in front of the sealed door, his nails scraping the old porch wood with a sound that cut through the night like knives. His breath rose in clouds of steam, chest heaving, every muscle alive with urgency. He barked again, short and fierce, the kind of bark that didn't ask for attention, it demanded it. The little girl clung to him with both hands, her tiny fingers gripping his collar as if he might run straight through the door if she let go. Her blue dress fluttered in the cold wind, her cheeks flushed from the biting air, but her eyes never left her dog. She didn't understand why he was acting this way. To her, it was just an old, broken house, a place adults said was empty. But she trusted him. She always trusted him. "Shoo, it's okay," she whispered softly, though her voice shook. "It's just a house." But the shepherd didn't calm. His ears were pinned forward, his tail stiff, his paws digging furiously at the frozen ground. He pressed his nose against the cracks of the wooden planks, inhaling deeply, then pulling back to bark again, his growl rumbling like a storm rolling across the mountains. It was not the sound of fear. It was warning. It was urgency. Something beyond the door was calling to him in a language only his instincts understood. The neighbors who had gathered stood back, watching with wide eyes. Their voices lowered to hushed whispers that carried a mixture of awe and fear. "Why won't he stop barking?" one man asked, his face pale under the lantern light. "He's never acted like this before," another replied. "It's that house," muttered an older woman, clutching her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I told you all, that place was never right." The teacher, who had come straight from her small classroom, knelt down to look at the dog more closely. "He's not afraid," she said quietly. "He's so certain, like he knows something's there." Her words sent a shiver through the crowd. They all knew this dog, loyal, protective, sharp as a blade. He wasn't the kind to bark at shadows or chase after nothing. If he was this unsettled, it meant something real. The little girl looked up at the adults, confusion on her face. Her big eyes searched their expressions, but no one gave her an answer. She turned back to her dog, kneeling in the frost, her tiny hand resting gently on his back. "What is it, boy?" she asked softly. Her voice was innocent, but it carried through the night like a prayer. "Why here? Why now?" The shepherd whined, a sound filled with frustration, then pressed his head against the door once more. His growl deepened, his body pushing harder, as if his heart knew that time itself was running short. He pawed furiously at the bottom edge, throwing up splinters of wood and small clouds of dust into the cold air. His entire being was focused on that door. Nothing else in the world mattered. Fear began to spread through the group, quiet but heavy. No one liked the feeling of the house, and now, with the dog's desperate cries echoing through the night, it felt as though something buried in its walls was breathing again. Some stepped back, clutching their coats, whispering prayers under their breath. Others leaned forward, their curiosity battling with dread. "Maybe it's an animal," the farmer offered, though his own voice carried doubt. "Or worse," muttered another, "something someone left behind." The shepherd barked again, sharp enough to make the crowd flinch. His body pressed low to the ground, tail stiff, every muscle trembling with the weight of his instincts. He wasn't just reacting, he was guarding, protecting, warning them that behind that shield would lay something that should not be ignored. The baby girl, too young to know fear the way adults did, stroked his fur with slow, steady hands. She whispered to him like she might whisper to her doll before bedtime. "I'm here. Don't be scared." But in truth, he was not the one who was afraid. He was the one standing between her and the unknown. The weight of the night pressed heavy around them. The lanterns flickered in the wind, and the crowd grew more restless. Some wanted to leave, to turn their backs on whatever secrets the house had guarded all these years. But others felt the same pull as the dog. "What if he's right?" a young man said suddenly, his voice louder than he intended. "What if there really is something behind there?" The question hung in the cold air, trembling like the breath of everyone who heard it. The dog's bark answered for them. Fierce, demanding, certain. Curiosity pushed against fear in every heart standing there that night. They did not know whether to run or to stay, but one thing was clear. The German shepherd had given them no choice. Something was behind that sealed door, and it would not stay hidden forever. By now, the whole street was awake. One by one, the townsfolk had stepped out of their warm houses, lanterns and flashlights in hand, drawn by the sound of the German shepherd's restless barking. The winter air cut at their faces, but curiosity was stronger than the cold. They came slowly at first, careful, like people approaching a grave they were not sure they wanted to visit. At the front of the group stood Mr. Harris, the farmer, his heavy boots crunching in the frost. He was a broad man with rough hands, hands that had buried both seeds in the soil and a son in the churchyard after a farm accident years ago. He knew the cry of animals well, and what he heard in that shepherd's voice was not nonsense. It was pain, warning, and certainty. His face was pale as he watched the dog claw at the planks. "Animals don't lie," he muttered, mostly to himself. "Not like people do." Beside him was Miss Carter, the schoolteacher, her long scarf pulled tight around her thin shoulders. She carried her books pressed against her chest as if they could shield her from the unease in the air. Only last winter, she had lost one of her brightest pupils to illness, a boy who used to sit in the front row and draw pictures of dogs when lessons got too long. She blinked back tears at the sight of the shepherd refusing to leave the door. To her, it was not just an animal barking. It was a cry for the voiceless, a demand for someone to be heard at last. Behind them, an old figure moved carefully, leaning on a cane. Grandmother Elsie, wrapped in two shawls, shuffled closer, her breath heavy but her eyes sharp. She was nearly 80, her back bent from years of labor and loss. Her husband had gone to war and never returned, and her daughter had died young, leaving her to raise grandchildren on her own. She had learned to live with silence, with unanswered questions. When she heard the dog's bark, it stirred something deep in her, the same ache she felt when a knock came at her door years ago with bad news. She whispered, "He knows. That animal knows what's hidden." Then came Officer Miller, the town's policeman, carrying his lantern and the weariness of too many years of duty. His uniform jacket was worn thin, his hair graying at the temples. He had seen sorrow in many forms: car crashes on icy roads, young men taken by alcohol, old men taken by loneliness. He had been the one to tell mothers that their sons were not coming home, fathers that their daughters would not walk through the door again. Now, he looked at the shepherd pawing and whining, and his heart felt the same knot he felt every time he stood at someone's porch with news he did not want to give. He set his lantern down, its glow casting long shadows across the porch. "I've never seen him like this," he said firmly. "This isn't play. He's guarding something. The German shepherd did not care for the crowd behind him. His whole world was the sealed door. His claws scraped again and again, sending splinters into the air. His nose pressed to the cracks, inhaling deeply, then pulling back to bark with a fury that made even the bravest men flinch. His body trembled with energy, every fiber screaming, "Open it! Open it now!" The little girl stood close, her small hands still on his collar. She had stopped trying to quiet him. Instead, she looked from his eyes to the heavy planks, her innocent face filled with both wonder and fear. She whispered softly, as though speaking not to the people but to the night itself, "He wants us to see." Her words carried like a fragile echo. The crowd fell silent, the only sound the dog's desperate scratching and the wind rattling through the bare branches. Questions rose in every mind. Was it an animal trapped inside? A secret long hidden? Or worse, something they had all ignored for too long? Mr. Harris shifted uneasily, rubbing his rough hands together. "Could be a raccoon or some wild thing," he said, though his voice lacked belief. "But I've had dogs all my life. They don't carry on like this unless it's serious." Miss Carter shook her head, her eyes locked on the dog. "No, he's not hunting. He's pleading. Can't you see it? He's trying to tell us something." Grandmother Elsie tightened her shawl. Her cane tapped the ground once, firm and steady. "There's sorrow behind that door," she said quietly. "I can feel it in my bones. And he feels it too." Officer Miller took a deep breath, his lantern light flickering on the nailed planks. "Then the question is, do we open it?" The crowd stirred, fear rising like smoke. Some shook their heads, muttering that the house was cursed, that doors sealed for decades should stay that way. Others leaned closer, driven by the same curiosity that had brought them out into the cold. The shepherd barked again, louder, his eyes fierce, his body striking the wood with urgency. He was not going to stop. Every cry was sharper than the last, echoing down the street, reaching into the heart of every person standing there. The air grew heavier, colder. No one spoke for a moment. The little girl hugged her doll against her chest, her tiny face pressed against the shepherd's fur. She was not afraid the way the adults were. She was waiting, ready to follow where her dog led. And so the question lingered in the night, thick and unavoidable. Should they leave the door sealed, as it had been for so many years? Or should they tear it open and face whatever waited in the shadows beyond? The German shepherd's answer was clear. He barked once more, his strongest cry yet, a sound that shook the crowd to its core. He would not stop until the truth was found. The night had grown heavier, the cold pressing down on every shoulder, but no one moved away. All eyes stayed fixed on the door of the forgotten house. The German shepherd had worn himself out barking, but still he pressed forward, his nose wedged against the cracks, his paws clawing at the wood as though sheer will might tear it open. His chest rose and fell with urgency, and his deep eyes shone with a desperate plea that even those who had never trusted animals could understand. Finally, Mr. Harris, the farmer, broke the silence. He looked at the crowd, his voice low but steady. "We can't just stand here while he carries on like this. We need tools." Several men nodded, uneasy but resolved. Within minutes, a few slipped back to their homes and returned with crowbars, hammers, and even a rusted axe that hadn't seen use since the last barn raising years ago. Their breath steamed in the frosty air as they stepped onto the porch, the old wood groaning under their boots. The dog's barking surged again when he saw them approach, his tail stiff, his body pressed against the door as if to guide them where to strike. His nails scraped the wood in frantic rhythm, and his whine deepened, almost like a plea, "Hurry! Hurry!" The men exchanged glances, their faces pale under the lantern light. They weren't just breaking into a forgotten house. They were prying open something that the town itself had chosen to leave shut for decades. But the dog's insistence left them no choice. The first crowbar slipped between the planks, wood splintering with a sharp crack. The sound echoed down the street like a gunshot, and the crowd flinched. Rusted nails groaned, bending slowly under pressure, their orange flakes sprinkling down like dust of old memories. The door shuddered but held. Another man swung the hammer, striking the planks with a hollow thud. Splinters flew, sharp against the night air. Every strike made the dog's energy grow wilder. He pawed harder, his breath harsh, his whines rising into sharp cries, as if urging the men to keep going. His eyes darted back and forth between the workers and the cracks, his whole body trembling with anticipation. Grandmother Elsie clutched her shawl tighter, whispering prayers under her breath. Miss Carter held her books so tightly against her chest that her knuckles turned white. Officer Miller stood close by, lantern raised high, the light flickering across the sweat on the men's foreheads despite the cold. The wood began to give way, small openings appearing where the planks once stood firm. Through the cracks, cold air rushed out, sharper, older, carrying with it the smell of dampness and something deeper, something that made the back of every neck prickle. The dog shoved his nose into the gap, inhaling desperately, then pulled back to bark again, the sound echoing off the houses, bouncing down the empty street. His paws struck the door so hard that it shook in its frame. The little girl, standing just a step behind him, placed her tiny hand on his back as if lending him strength. She didn't speak, but her wide eyes followed every movement, her small chest rising and falling as though she too could feel what was waiting. The hammer fell again, then again. The crowbar twisted, nails screaming as they bent and snapped. The planks tore away one by one, falling with dull thuds onto the porch. The crowd pressed closer, their breaths fast and shallow. At last, only the heavy door itself remained. It was thick, dark with age, its grain swollen by years of storms. Officer Miller stepped forward, set his lantern down, and gripped the axe with both hands. He paused, his jaw tight, his eyes glancing once at the German shepherd. The dog looked back at him, silent now, his gaze fierce and unyielding. For a moment, man and animal seemed to share an understanding. This must be done. The axe swung. Wood cracked, splinters bursting outward. Fin, fin. Each strike rang through the night, mixing with the gasps of the crowd and the heavy rhythm of the shepherd's breath. The door groaned under the punishment, its hinges creaking, nails rattling loose. The little girl's hand clutched tighter around her doll. She whispered almost to herself, "Please, open it. Please." At last, with one final heave, the farmer and Officer Miller pressed together, crowbar and axe striking in unison. The old wood gave a long, aching creak that seemed to come not just from the door but from the house itself, as if it were sighing in defeat. The door swung inward, slow and heavy, the darkness inside swallowing the glow of the lantern light. A rush of air escaped, cold and damp, carrying with it a smell that silenced every whisper, stilled every breath. It was the smell of time itself, stale, sorrowful, like secrets buried too long. The German shepherd stopped barking. His body went rigid, his ears forward, his tail stiff. He stepped toward the open gap, his paws deliberate, his nose twitching as he peered into the shadows. The crowd held back, not daring to cross the threshold, but he pressed closer, his body leaning into the darkness as if drawn by an unseen hand. No one spoke. The world seemed to pause. The lantern flames flickered nervously, casting long shadows against the porch and across the faces of the gathered townsfolk. And then, in the stillness, came a sound, faint, hollow, almost like a whisper rising from the depths of the house. The people looked at each other, fear flashing in their eyes. What had they just unleashed? The door groaned as it opened wider, and a heavy breath of air rushed out, colder than the night itself. It carried with it the smell of damp earth and long-forgotten sorrow, a scent so heavy it made the crowd step back, covering their mouths with scarves and sleeves. It was not just the smell of an empty house. It was the smell of time that had stood still behind those planks, time that no one dared to touch until now. The lantern light flickered uncertainly against the doorway. Shadows danced along the walls, stretching like dark fingers across the rotting floorboards. No one moved. The silence that followed was so sharp it seemed to ring in their ears. Then the German shepherd, unafraid, pressed forward. His nails clicked against the wood as he crossed the threshold, his body lowering into a cautious stance. His ears were up, his nose twitching, every step deliberate. The little girl gasped softly but did not try to stop him. She clutched her doll to her chest, her wide eyes following him into the gloom. Her lips trembled as though she wanted to call him back, but she knew, just as the others did, that he was meant to go first. The crowd held its breath as the dog disappeared into the shadows, the glow of the lantern barely catching the curve of his back. His bark came once, sharp and commanding, echoing off unseen walls inside. Then came the sound of scratching, nails raking against something hidden below. Officer Miller raised the lantern higher, stepping carefully onto the threshold. "It's not just a room," he murmured, his voice hollow. "There's more." The light revealed a set of wooden boards laid unevenly on the floor. They were stained dark, their edges worn, as though many feet had once moved across them. In one corner, half buried under dust and broken plaster, was the outline of a hatch door. Its iron handle was thick with rust, but the shepherd pawed at it furiously, barking, whining, pushing with his nose. He wanted it open. Two men stepped forward with their crowbars, their hands shaking as they wedged the metal beneath the handle. With a grunt, they pulled. The wood cracked and moaned, the hinges screeching in protest until, with a sudden snap, the hatch gave way. A wave of air burst upward, damp and heavy, like the breath of a grave. The lantern's flame flickered nearly out, fighting against the draft. A staircase led downward, its steps narrow and steep, vanishing into a darkness so deep that even the light seemed afraid to follow. Gasps rose from the crowd as the smell grew stronger, mildew, rotting cloth, and something that felt like sorrow itself. The German shepherd barked again and stepped onto the first stair, his body tense but certain. He paused only to glance back at the little girl as though to say, "Stay here," before moving downward. The lantern light followed, swinging in Officer Miller's hand. Each step creaked, the sound loud in the heavy silence. The crowd leaned forward at the doorway, every eye fixed on the darkness below. And then, slowly, the scene revealed itself. At the bottom of the stairs stretched a narrow chamber, carved into the earth itself. The walls were rough stone, slick with moisture. The air hung heavy, pressing against their chests with the weight of years. In the dim light, shapes began to emerge from the shadows. There, in the corner, lay a torn blanket, its fabric shredded and stiff with age. Beside it, a cracked porcelain doll stared upward with hollow eyes, its painted face chipped and smeared. A small wooden car rested on its side, one wheel missing, its edges softened from being held too tightly. And there, against the far wall, scratched into the stone itself, were marks. Deep, uneven lines, carved by desperate hands. A hush fell over the crowd above. No one spoke, but everyone felt it, the undeniable truth. This was no ordinary cellar. It was a place where someone had been kept, where time had passed in silence and suffering. Miss Carter clutched her scarf tighter, her eyes filling with tears. "Children," she whispered, her voice breaking. These were a child's things. The German shepherd lowered his head, sniffing the blanket, then the doll. He whimpered, a sound filled with sorrow, then pressed his paw against the scratches on the wall as though recognizing the pain left there. He turned, barking once more, his voice echoing through the chamber like a demand that the truth not be ignored. Grandmother Elsie's cane shook in her hand. She bowed her head, her voice trembling. So it was true, all those stories. Someone was here, and no one listened. The little girl clutched at her grandmother's shawl, her innocent eyes wide and wet. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough that this was a place of sadness. She pressed her face into the fabric, whispering, "Poor baby," as though speaking to the child who once lay under that blanket. The crowd was frozen, their hearts heavy with a mixture of horror and guilt. They had all heard the whispers over the years, rumors of disappearances, of cries in the night, of a house that wasn't right. Yet no one had ever looked closer. No one had opened the door. And now, with the chamber open before them, they felt the weight of that neglect pressing hard against their souls. The shepherd stood guard at the center of the chamber, his eyes glowing in the lantern's light. His breath steamed in the cold air, his chest rising and falling with determination. He was not afraid. He was not confused. He knew why he had led them here, to show them the truth. Slowly, Officer Miller set the lantern down on the stone floor, its glow spreading across the scattered toys, the torn blanket, and the walls that bore the scars of hands that had once begged for freedom. His jaw tightened as he spoke, his voice hoarse. This wasn't just a sealed door. This was a sealed life. The words struck deep, and silence followed once more. The only sound was the faint drip of water from the stone walls and the soft, steady breath of the German shepherd who stood, unshaken, in the heart of the forgotten chamber. The chamber lay open, its sorrowful silence pressing against everyone who dared to look inside. The German shepherd stood firm in the middle of it, his ears alert, his nose sweeping across the damp stones. He sniffed slowly, methodically, as though each scent carried a story. His body trembled, not with fear, but with recognition, as if he had uncovered something the world had tried too long to forget. Above, at the edge of the stairway, the crowd stood in silence. No one spoke at first. The air felt too heavy, their throats too tight. But then Grandmother Elsie's voice broke through, frail but certain. "I remember," she whispered, her cane tapping once on the wooden floor. Her eyes, clouded with age, stared not at the chamber but at a memory far away. "I was a girl then. There was a boy, Tommy. He was 10. He never came home one autumn night. Folks searched the fields, the barns, the creek, but they never found him. His poor mother sat on her porch for years, waiting. Every evening she would light a lantern and keep it in the window, hoping he'd see it and come back." The crowd bowed their heads. Some remembered the story, though most had buried it in whispers and half-remembered talk. Others had only heard fragments, bedtime warnings not to stay out too late. But Elsie's trembling words gave the story flesh, pressing the old wound fresh again. Miss Carter, the teacher, brushed at her eyes. "I heard of another, a little girl, Anna May. She loved to sing. Her father worked the mill. One day she went to fetch water from the pump and never returned. Her mother searched the woods until her shoes wore through. Her voice cracked. Some said she ran away. But a child that young doesn't run away. She was taken." A hush fell deeper still. The younger faces in the crowd turned pale, as if realizing for the first time that the old rumors they'd laughed off were not just tales but truths buried under fear. The shepherd nosed deeper into the chamber. His paw pressed against a pile of dust and cloth, stirring up a faint cloud that glittered in the lantern light. Something small rolled free. The little girl gasped. It was a shoe. Tiny, worn, the leather cracked with age. A child's shoe, no bigger than the palm of a hand. One lace still clung, stiff and darkened. The shepherd lowered his nose to it, inhaled deeply, then let out a long, mournful whine that carried up the staircase and into every heart gathered there. A woman in the crowd pressed her hand to her mouth, tears filling her eyes. "I knew that shoe," she whispered. "My sister had the pair. She lost one the day she vanished. We thought it was gone forever." Her shoulders shook as her sobs escaped. No one moved to comfort her at first. They were all too stunned, their own memories uncoiling like ghosts in the cold night. The chamber no longer looked like just stone and shadows. It became a mirror of every story, every loss, every cry that had gone unanswered. The torn blanket, the cracked doll, the tiny shoe, each piece was a voice echoing from the past, demanding to be heard. Mr. Harris, the farmer, rubbed his face roughly, his voice breaking as he spoke. "I was just a boy when it happened. I remember my father coming home, his lantern gone out, his boots muddy from searching the woods. He never said a word, but I saw it in his eyes. He had given up hope. And still, my mother never stopped setting an extra plate at the table, just in case." The crowd shifted uneasily. Every story seemed to weave into another, forming a tapestry of grief they had all carried without speaking of it. It was as though the house itself had swallowed their sorrow, keeping it hidden behind nailed boards and whispered warnings. Officer Miller's face was pale in the lantern glow. He had always prided himself on being a man of facts, of evidence, of clear answers. But here, standing at the edge of the darkness, he felt the weight of all the unsolved mysteries, all the families left without truth. His voice trembled as he spoke, softer than anyone had ever heard it. "This isn't just a cellar. This isn't just a sealed door. This is a graveyard of trust. We turned away when we should have looked closer." The shepherd whined again, circling the chamber, his tail low, his ears forward. He sniffed at the stone wall where scratches had been carved deep into the surface. His paw rested there, pressing gently against the marks. The lantern light caught the grooves, showing names half-formed, lines that might have been tallies of days, or pleas for help written by hands too small to carve clearly. Miss Carter dropped to her knees on the porch above, tears running freely down her cheeks. "Children," she whispered again. "So many children." The little girl, her blue dress glowing faintly in the lantern light, clutched her doll tightly to her chest. She didn't know all the stories, but she knew enough to feel the sorrow in the air. Her small voice carried across the silence, "They were waiting for us." Her words struck like a bell. The crowd stirred, some sobbing quietly, others covering their faces. They realized now what they had uncovered was not only the chamber but the truth they had all turned from. This was not just a door. It was a story of pain, of children lost, of voices silenced. And it was the shepherd, loyal and unyielding, who had forced them to face it. The air inside the chamber felt heavy, like a place that had swallowed time and sorrow together. The townsfolk stood in silence, their breath showing white clouds in the cold, their hearts uneasy as they tried to understand what they were seeing. The German shepherd moved slowly, his paws pressing against the damp ground, his ears turning at every faint sound. The baby girl in the blue dress clutched her grandmother's hand, her wide eyes shining in the dim lantern light. Something was here, something still alive. At first, it was only a feeling, a strange trembling in the silence, as though the walls themselves were holding back a secret. Then came the sound, faint, so faint it could have been mistaken for the wind. A whimper, weak, trembling, so soft that only the shepherd seemed to notice at first. His ears shot up, and his tail lowered into a sharp line. He barked once, not the furious bark of warning, but a short, urgent cry that sent shivers through everyone present. He began digging, his paws tearing at the packed dirt in the far corner of the chamber, sending dust and old splinters flying. "Wait, he's found something," the old policeman said, his voice breaking the silence. Everyone rushed forward, lanterns lifted high, eyes straining to see what had captured the dog's focus. The shepherd clawed at a pile of crates stacked against the wall, his muscles straining, his body desperate. The baby girl let go of her grandmother's hand and toddled closer, whispering softly, "Go on, boy. Find it." Her small voice gave the moment a strange holiness, as though a prayer had been spoken. The men moved quickly, pushing away the heavy crates. Their wooden sides cracked with age, scattering rusted nails and dust across the floor. Behind them, the faint whimper came again, louder this time. The crowd froze. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't the wind. It was real. A living soul was trapped beneath. The shepherd pressed harder, his claws ripping at the last layer of broken boards. Then the sound became clearer, a cry, small and pitiful, like life clinging to hope after too much pain. One final shove of the crates, and suddenly, in the weak glow of the lanterns, a shape appeared, a tiny body, frail and trembling, hidden in the shadows. It was a puppy, its fur dirty and matted, its ribs pressing sharply against its skin. Its eyes, though weak, glimmered in the light with a pleading look that pierced every heart in that room. A gasp rose from the crowd. The teacher dropped her scarf and covered her mouth in shock. The grandmother began to cry softly, her tears slipping down her wrinkled cheeks. Even the old farmer, who had lived through storms and losses, bowed his head as though he was standing before something holy. The baby girl bent down carefully, her blue dress brushing the dusty floor, and held out her tiny arms. The German shepherd stepped back slightly, allowing her to be the first to touch the fragile creature. With trembling hands, she lifted the starving puppy against her chest. The puppy whimpered once, then nuzzled weakly into her warmth, as though it had been waiting for her all along. The room seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was the tiny heartbeat against the child's small body. The grandmother whispered, "God above, it's alive." The policeman's stern face softened as he turned his eyes away, ashamed of the tears threatening to fall. The townsfolk, who had come here with fear and suspicion, now felt something greater, a mix of sorrow and relief, a reminder of how fragile life could be and how powerful it was to witness survival. The German shepherd stood tall beside the baby girl, his chest heaving, his eyes steady. He had led them here, he had found what others could not, and now he watched with quiet pride as the little one cradled the new life in her arms. The townsfolk understood this was no ordinary dog. He carried an instinct that came from loyalty, from love, from something higher than reason. The farmer removed his cap and held it to his chest. "This is a miracle," he said softly. The teacher nodded, her voice trembling as she added, "It's like the house was waiting for him, waiting for this dog to uncover it." The crowd murmured in agreement, their fear slowly giving way to something warmer, something that felt like faith. The puppy stirred weakly in the baby girl's embrace, letting out a faint whimper, then nestled deeper into the crook of her arm. The shepherd stepped closer, pressing his nose gently against the puppy, as though promising protection. He then turned his eyes to the people as if to say, "You see? This is why I barked. This is why I did not stop." The baby girl looked up at her grandmother, her cheeks flushed from the cold and the weight of the moment. "He saved it," she whispered. "My dog saved the baby." Her words broke what little composure remained among the crowd. Tears fell openly now, not just for the rescued puppy, but for all the pain and silence that had been hidden behind the sealed door. For years, the house had been feared, avoided, dismissed as a place of shadows. But now, standing here with a starving puppy pulled from its darkness, the people realized the truth. This was not just about mystery or fear. This was about compassion, about the unexplainable courage of an animal, about how even in forgotten corners of sorrow, life could cling on and wait for love to find it. The old policeman cleared his throat, his voice thick as he spoke. This little one, it would not have survived another night in here. The dog knew. He knew before any of us. His hand trembled as he adjusted the lantern, and the glow caught the shepherd's proud stance, the baby girl's gentle embrace, and the faint rise and fall of the puppy's fragile chest. It was an image no one would ever forget. As they left the chamber, the cold wind outside no longer felt bitter. Instead, it carried a strange peace, as though the town itself had exhaled after years of silence. The shepherd walked ahead, his head high, the baby girl following close behind with the puppy pressed against her heart. The crowd trailed after them, their faces softer, their steps slower, each of them carrying the weight of what they had witnessed. What had begun with fear had turned into something else entirely, a night of discovery, of tears, of renewal. And in the center of it all was a dog who refused to be ignored, a child who trusted him without question, and a fragile life saved against all odds. The puppy's cries were faint, but they carried enough strength to stir every heart in the crowd. Wrapped gently in the baby girl's small arms, it trembled with exhaustion, its fur dirty, its ribs sharp beneath its skin. The German shepherd walked closely beside her, his steady frame like a wall of protection. The townsfolk, who had once gathered out of fear, now followed behind in silence, as if escorting a fragile miracle through the cold night. By the time they reached the main road, someone had already run ahead to fetch the town's only veterinarian, Dr. Morgan, a kind man with white hair who had cared for both farm animals and family pets for more than 40 years. His small clinic stood at the corner of Maple Street, its lantern light glowing warm against the snowy darkness. When the baby girl stepped inside, clutching the bundle of life against her chest, the room seemed to shift. Dr. Morgan moved quickly but gently, his hands steady as he placed the puppy onto a soft blanket near the fire. He examined its frail body, listening to the shallow breaths, checking the small paws that trembled from hunger and cold. Then he looked up at the townsfolk, who crowded the doorway, their faces filled with worry. "It's weak," he said softly, "but alive. With food, warmth, and time, this little one has a chance." The German shepherd stood nearby, his eyes fixed on the vet as though he understood every word. He gave a low whine, pressing his nose against the blanket, unwilling to leave the puppy's side. The baby girl crouched beside him, her tiny hand resting on his back, her innocent gaze fixed on the flickering firelight. When Dr. Morgan offered the puppy a small dish of warm milk, the shepherd nudged it closer with his nose, as if reminding everyone that he was not just a bystander. He was the reason they were here. The room fell quiet as the puppy's tongue touched the milk, slow at first, then with growing strength. A soft cheer rose from the people watching, not loud, but heartfelt, the kind of sound that came from deep relief. Tears welled in the teacher's eyes, the grandmother clasped her hands together in silent prayer, and even the old farmer wiped at his weathered face with the back of his sleeve. In that moment, the weight of the abandoned house, the years of rumors and grief, seemed to soften. Hope had slipped back into the town, carried in the fragile body of a rescued pup. Word of the discovery spread quickly. By morning, the entire town knew about the German shepherd who had barked until the sealed door was opened, the child who had trusted him, and the life they had pulled from the darkness. People who had once avoided the old house now spoke of it with a different tone. It was no longer just a place of sorrow, it had become the setting of a miracle. The local newspaper printed a small piece titled, "The Dog Who Would Not Be Silent." For many, it was more than a headline. It was a lesson. The German shepherd, once just another loyal companion walking the streets with his little girl, had become a hero. He had reminded everyone that instincts, loyalty, and courage could sometimes reveal truths that human eyes refused to see. In the days that followed, the puppy's strength slowly returned. Its once shaking legs began to steady, its small cries grew louder, and its eyes opened wider with each passing hour. The German shepherd never left its side, lying near the basket at the vet's office as if guarding a treasure. The baby girl visited every morning, her blue dress bright against the pale winter walls, her laughter filling the room with warmth. She would sit beside the basket, whispering to the puppy in words only children understand, her smile so pure that even the hardest hearts softened when they saw her. For the townsfolk, it was not just about a puppy being saved. It was about something deeper, a shift they had long been waiting for but never expected. Old griefs, buried like the house's secrets, began to ease. The grandmother who had once lost her son felt her heart stir with new tenderness. The farmer, who had lived years in silence after burying his wife, found himself smiling again. Even the policeman, whose eyes had grown tired from years of small-town duties, admitted quietly that he hadn't felt hope this strong in a long time. And at the center of it all was the shepherd, the dog who had refused to be quiet, the dog who had seen what no one else could. His steady watchfulness, his growls, his paws tearing at the wood, all of it had led them here. In the eyes of the people, he was no longer just a dog. He was their protector, their guide, their reminder that even in silence, truth waits to be uncovered. One evening, as the townsfolk gathered outside the vet's clinic, the baby girl came out holding the now-rested puppy. The shepherd stood tall beside her, his dark eyes shining under the glow of the street lamp. The crowd broke into soft applause, not the kind meant for stages or shows, but the kind that came from gratitude. The baby girl, too small to understand the weight of it, only laughed, lifting the puppy high in her tiny arms. Her innocent joy melted every heavy heart in that circle. For the people of the town, that image would never be forgotten. The brave shepherd standing guard, the rescued puppy pressed close, and the little girl in her blue dress smiling as though she had brought light back into a dark world. It was more than a memory. It was healing. It was proof that the forgotten could be saved, that sorrow could be softened, and that sometimes heroes had four legs and fur. The night was cold again, but this time the town did not hide behind closed doors. People gathered near the old house where the sealed door had once stood, the very place that had held so much silence, fear, and sorrow. Now, the wooden boards had been carried away, the darkness no longer a secret, and the ground outside was swept clean by careful hands. In its place, lanterns and candles flickered, casting a gentle glow that pushed back the shadows. The townsfolk came slowly, each carrying something simple, a candle, a small bouquet of flowers, even an old photograph of loved ones they had lost. The teacher held a notebook filled with names of children she had once taught. The farmer carried his late wife's scarf, soft with age. The grandmother held a worn Bible that had guided her through nights of tears. These were not grand offerings, but they were pieces of their lives, their memories, their love. At the center of it all stood the German shepherd, strong and steady, his dark eyes reflecting the candlelight. Beside him, the baby girl held the rescued puppy in her small arms, her blue dress glowing softly in the light of the flames. The little one laughed when the puppy squirmed playfully, and the shepherd leaned close as if to steady them both. The sight made many in the crowd smile through their tears. The old policeman cleared his throat, his voice low but firm. "We came here once with fear in our hearts," he said, looking at the gathered faces. "But tonight we come with hope. We come with gratitude. This dog showed us what loyalty looks like. This little girl showed us what trust looks like. And this puppy," he paused, his voice trembling just slightly, "this puppy is proof that even when we think all is lost, life can begin again." The people murmured in agreement. Some wiped their eyes, others reached out to hold hands. For years, the abandoned house had been a wound in the town, a reminder of unanswered questions, of losses that had no voice. But now, standing together in the glow of flickering light, The people felt something they had not felt in a long time: unity. One by one, they began to share. The teacher spoke of a boy she had once taught who never came back to school. She had prayed for him for decades, and tonight, she felt as though her prayers had been heard. The grandmother told of her son, gone too soon, and how seeing the puppy safe in the little girl's arms gave her heart a kind of peace she had thought impossible. Even the farmer, whose words rarely stretched beyond his fields, said softly, "Hope doesn't die, not if we choose to keep it alive." As stories flowed, the baby girl's laughter rose above them, light and pure. She set the puppy on the ground, and together with the German shepherd, they played in the soft circle of candlelight. The puppy stumbled clumsily, its legs still uncertain, but the shepherd guided it with patience, nudging it gently back toward the child each time it strayed. The people watched silently, hearts full, as though witnessing a living symbol, the old guarding the new, the strong protecting the fragile, love passing from one generation to the next. Sometimes animals see what humans ignore. They hear cries we do not, sense danger we overlook, and remind us that love never dies. It may grow quiet, it may hide behind sealed doors, but it waits, patient, enduring, for the moment it can shine again. The candles flickered as if agreeing. The house that had once been a place of whispers now echoed with voices full of remembrance and renewal. No one spoke of curses or fear anymore. Instead, they spoke of loyalty, of faith, of bonds that stretch beyond loss. When the gathering began to end, many lingered, not wanting to leave. They pressed a hand gently on the shepherd's head as they walked by, murmuring thanks as though he could understand every word, and perhaps he did. They smiled at the baby girl, who hugged the puppy tightly, her small arms wrapped around the tiny body that had nearly been lost. That sight, they knew, would remain with them longer than any sorrow. As the last candle burned low, the shepherd lifted his head and gave a soft, steady bark, not a cry of warning this time, but a sound that felt almost like a promise. The people turned once more toward the little family, the loyal dog, the innocent child, and the rescued pup, and in that moment, they knew they were not just witnesses to a miracle. They were part of it. For years to come, when winter winds rattled through the town and nights grew long, the people would tell the story of that night. They would speak of the shepherd who refused to stay silent, the little girl in her blue dress whose trust never wavered, and the puppy who became the living proof that even forgotten sorrow could be healed. And they would remind each other, gently, faithfully, that love never dies. The night had ended, but its meaning would live on forever. The sealed door was gone, the old fear replaced by something far stronger, a memory of unity, a reminder of loyalty, and a proof that even in the darkest corners, love can still be found. The German shepherd, standing tall and watchful, had led the town to a truth they might never have seen. By his side, the little girl in her blue dress carried a smile so pure it could melt the coldest heart. And in her arms, the rescued puppy rested, alive and safe, a small symbol of hope that would grow stronger with each passing day. The people returned to their homes that night, but their hearts carried something new. They carried the sound of the dog's bark echoing through silence. They carried the sight of the child's innocence. They carried the feeling of healing, as though old wounds had been touched by a gentle hand. This was more than a rescue. It was a reminder that miracles often come in forms we least expect. For centuries, humans have walked beside dogs. They have guarded our homes, followed us into battle, waited at our doors, and loved us without question. But sometimes, they do more than guard or serve. They reveal truths hidden from human eyes. They sense what we do not, they feel what we cannot, and they lead us to places where healing waits. On this night, the shepherd did exactly that. He reminded everyone that loyalty has a voice, and it is a voice that refuses to be silenced. As the town looked back on this night, They realized that the story was not only about an old sealed door or a hidden chamber. It was about trust. The trust of a child in her dog, the trust of neighbors in one another, and the trust of a community in the power of love. What began as fear ended as unity. What began as sorrow ended as hope. And perhaps that is the lesson we all must carry. Sometimes it is the youngest and the purest, a child, a puppy, a loyal dog, who remind us of truths we forget. That love is stronger than fear. That loyalty outlasts loss. That kindness, even when buried under years of silence, can still rise again and heal a community. So now I ask you, from my heart to yours, do you believe dogs sense what humans cannot? Do you believe they carry a wisdom deeper than words, a loyalty stronger than time? If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in kindness. Tell them of the dog who would not stop barking, of the little girl who trusted him, and of the puppy who became a sign of hope. Let them know that even in a world that sometimes feels heavy with sorrow, light still breaks through when love leads the way. And as you finish this story, take a moment to reflect on your own journey. Perhaps you too have faced sealed doors in life, moments of pain, silence, or fear. Remember the shepherd's bark. Remember the little girl's smile. Remember that no door stays sealed forever when love is knocking. This was not just a tale of a dog and a child. It was a reminder that we are never truly alone, that loyalty still walks beside us, and that healing can come when we open our hearts. If you believe in that, then you are already part of this story. If this touched you, leave your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, share your own stories of loyalty and love, and subscribe for more journeys like this. Because stories like these are not just meant to be told, they are meant to be shared, carried from heart to heart, reminding us all that kindness is still alive. And so, the story ends not with silence, but with hope. Not with fear, but with love. A shepherd, a child, and a puppy, 3 lives intertwined, 3 hearts teaching a town, and perhaps even the world, that love never dies.